In a room full of diamonds and designer gowns, a simple woman walked in wearing a handmade dress. They laughed. One man even shouted, "That's a poor woman's dress." But what no one knew was that she had stitched every masterpiece in that ballroom. And before the night was over, she would make the millionaire who mocked her swallow his pride. This is the story of Elisa Moreau, the woman who turned humiliation into elegance and silence into power. Elisa Moreau had spent most of her 27 years behind a sewing machine, her fingers marked by countless pricks and threads of every color. She didn't own a designer dress, yet she had designed hundreds that had dazzled Paris runways. Tonight, though, she wasn't behind the curtain. She was holding an invitation, trembling in disbelief. The golden letters shimmered with her name. Elisa Moreau, guest of honor. Her heart pounded with equal parts hope and fear. The invitation wasn't meant for someone like her, or so she thought. Working as an assistant in one of the city's most exclusive fashion houses, she had always stayed invisible, the ghost behind the glamour. But this time, her name had slipped through the cracks of anonymity, finding its way to the spotlight. As she stared at it, she could almost hear her late mother whispering, "You were born to shine, even in borrowed light." Her apartment was small, with peeling wallpaper and the faint scent of lavender she used to mask the musty air. On the table lay scraps of fabric, bits of dreams stitched into secret sketches. She didn't own anything appropriate for a gala, so she decided to make her own dress, a soft ivory creation with hand-stitched lace and subtle embroidery. It wasn't glamorous by elite standards, but it reflected her heart. The next evening, Paris glowed beneath golden street lamps as carriages and luxury cars glided toward the Grand Hotel. Elisa stepped out of the metro, clutching her small purse, her breath catching at the sight of the glittering facade. Every window shimmered with wealth and power, and she, a seamstress from Montmartre, was about to walk into it. Inside, the ballroom was alive with music, laughter, and the sparkle of diamonds. Waiters moved like dancers, carrying trays of champagne and caviar. Women in dresses worth more than Elisa's yearly salary floated through the room, their perfumes weaving through the air. Elisa took a deep breath, holding her head high, determined to belong if only for one night. She found herself near a marble staircase, trying to appear composed. But whispers began to spread as eyes turned toward her simple handmade gown. "Who invited her?" someone muttered. "That's definitely not couture," another snickered. Elisa's chest tightened, but she refused to shrink. Every stitch of her dress was her truth, and that truth was beautiful. As the orchestra swelled, she caught sight of Clara Duval, her boss standing beneath a chandelier, smiling for photographers. Clara wore one of Elisa's designs, though no one knew it. The irony stung. Elisa felt both pride and bitterness seeing her work praised under someone else's name. Still, she found a quiet corner, hoping to blend in. She sipped her champagne slowly, watching the dazzling crowd swirl around her. It was a world she had built but never been allowed to enter. She didn't know that her quiet strength was about to collide with arrogance in its purest form. Then came the voice that would ignite it all, smooth, condescending, dripping with wealth. "That's a poor woman's dress," Henri Beaumont announced loudly, his laughter echoing across the room. Every head turned toward Elisa. Her hands trembled as humiliation burned through her, but she didn't speak. Not yet. And as Henri smirked, unaware of the fire he had just lit, Elisa whispered to herself, "Someday, you'll regret those words." Sometimes the smallest moments change everything, and Elisa's night is just beginning. If you want to see what happens when courage meets cruelty, hit subscribe and stay with me for the next chapter, because the most powerful transformations often start with a single humiliation. The laughter lingered long after the moment had passed, like smoke that refused to clear. Elisa tried to steady her breathing, her eyes fixed on the golden chandelier above. Henri Beaumont, the billionaire investor of the fashion house, had returned to his circle, smug and satisfied, surrounded by people eager to echo his mockery. The orchestra played on, oblivious to the quiet war beginning in Elisa's heart. She didn't leave, not yet. Instead, she found strength in stillness. Every cruel glance that brushed her direction became another stitch in her invisible armor. The scent of roses and champagne filled the air, but beneath it was the unmistakable odor of vanity, expensive, intoxicating, and empty. She suddenly saw through the illusion of perfection that had always intimidated her. Lucienne, a photographer with kind eyes, noticed her isolation and approached. "Don't let them define your worth," he said softly, holding his camera like a shield. "They only mock what they don't understand." His voice carried warmth, not pity, and for the first time that night, Elisa smiled faintly, but sincerely. He offered her a seat near the edge of the ballroom, where she could see everything. From there, she watched the guests like a quiet observer of a strange play, each laugh rehearsed, each compliment fake. She realized that while they wore designer gowns, none carried the grace she'd woven into her own. The irony brought her a flicker of courage. As the runway lights flickered on, Clara Duval stepped up to introduce the new collection, her collection. The crowd cheered, cameras flashed, and the models began to walk. Elisa's breath caught. Each dress was hers. Her stitches, her imagination, her soul displayed under someone else's name. It felt like betrayal disguised in silk. Tears welled in her eyes, but anger quickly burned them away. She had endured invisibility for too long. Every seam on those dresses carried a piece of her pain, and now they were paraded like trophies. Lucienne noticed her trembling hands and whispered, "Say something." She shook her head, but her silence was thinning thread by thread. As applause thundered, Henri raised his glass toward Clara, smiling proudly. "To true artistry," he toasted. Elisa bit her lips so hard she tasted blood. The hypocrisy was unbearable. The man who mocked her dress was now celebrating the very woman who had stolen it. And at that moment, something inside Elisa shifted, a spark of defiance she hadn't known she possessed. She rose from her seat, her eyes blazing. The night wasn't over. It was only beginning. Henri Beaumont had built his empire on charm and cruelty in equal measure. He was the kind of man who saw people as investments, either profitable or disposable. When he mocked Elisa, it wasn't personal. To him, it was entertainment. But as the laughter echoed through the ballroom, something about her silence unsettled him. Most would have fled, yet she stood there, proud and still, like a painting that refused to fade. Elisa's composure began to draw quiet attention. Whispers turned from mockery to curiosity. Henri watched her from across the room, confused by the steadiness in her eyes. There was no pleading, no shame, only a strange confidence that made him uncomfortable. He wasn't used to seeing defiance dressed in humility. For the first time that evening, he felt oddly exposed. Lucien moved closer, subtly placing himself between Henri's group and Elisa. "You've faced worse," he murmured, handing her a glass of water instead of champagne. His words anchored her. Around them, the laughter was already shifting to new targets, but Henri's gaze lingered. He wanted to know who this woman was and why she hadn't broken. Later, as the models walked down the runway, Henri clapped mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Every gown that passed stirred an unfamiliar recognition in him. The delicate stitching, the patterns they felt familiar. It was only when Elisa's eyes met his from across the room that realization flickered, brief and sharp. But he brushed it away as impossible. The show ended to thunderous applause, but Henri's thoughts stayed tangled. Who was she? Why did her presence feel like a mirror held to his arrogance? He didn't yet know it, but the woman he had mocked would soon dismantle the world he believed he ruled. When the lights dimmed for the after-party, the atmosphere softened. Champagne flowed, laughter returned, and people forgot the uncomfortable moment that had passed. Everyone except Elisa. She sat quietly by a grand window overlooking Paris, the city lights reflecting on the tears she refused to let fall. Lucien approached again, his camera now hanging idle at his side. "You don't belong behind them," he said gently, nodding toward the crowd. "You belong above them." His voice wasn't flattery, it was truth. Elisa smiled faintly, touched by his sincerity. She had met many who praised her work in secret, but Lucien was different, he saw her. His kindness didn't pity her, it empowered her. Lucien showed her a photo he'd taken earlier, her standing tall under the chandelier, unbent even as others mocked. "This," he said, "is strength." Elisa looked at the picture and saw what she'd never noticed before, not a poor seamstress, but a woman who carried quiet power. The photo felt like a mirror reflecting who she was meant to become. She glanced back at the stage, where Clara was now surrounded by admirers and reporters. Each question about the designs felt like a knife, but instead of turning away, Elisa whispered, "They're mine." Lucien met her gaze, steady and firm. "Then show them," he urged. Her pulse quickened. The idea terrified her, yet deep down, she knew he was right. As the orchestra began another song, Elisa stood smoothing the folds of her dress. Her fear had melted into determination. The night that began with humiliation would not end that way. She turned toward the stage, her mind set, her steps deliberate. The crowd didn't know it yet, but the quiet girl in the corner was about to steal the show. Backstage was a whirlwind of silk, perfume, and celebration. Models laughed as assistants rushed around, adjusting gowns and taking photos. Elisa slipped behind the curtains, unseen, her heart pounding. She watched Clara soaking in the praise, her name echoing through the room like a crown. Every compliment was a blade twisting deeper into Elisa's chest, each one sharpened by injustice. She moved closer, her eyes tracing the stitches on the gowns, her stitches. She could recognize them anywhere. The way the lace hugged the fabric, the subtle thread patterns only she would dare attempt. It was like seeing her own soul paraded in someone else's name. Her hands trembled, not with weakness, but with contained fury ready to spill over. Elisa overheard Clara's voice, calm, charming, deceitful. "Yes, it took months of work," Clara said, smiling to a journalist. "Inspiration comes from understanding beauty on every level." The words made Elisa's stomach twist. She wanted to scream, to expose it all. But part of her feared what would happen if she did. Would anyone even believe her? Lucien found her standing frozen, her knuckles white around her purse. "You're shaking," he said softly. "You should tell them." Elisa met his eyes, her voice low and certain. "Not yet," she said. "When I speak, they'll have no choice but to listen." Lucien nodded, sensing the storm building behind her calm. As Clara stepped onto the stage to make her victory speech, Elisa took a deep breath. Her mind raced with memories of long nights stitching under dim lights, tears mixing with thread, dreams whispered into fabric. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about dignity, and she would reclaim hers before the night ended. The crowd erupted as Clara lifted her champagne glass, smiling beneath the chandeliers. "To creativity, courage, and the art of elegance," she declared. Her words dripped with irony. Elisa stood at the edge of the stage, invisible to most, but burning with purpose. The applause thundered through her chest, echoing like a countdown. Something inside her snapped quietly, decisively. She stepped forward, her heels tapping against the marble floor, each sound deliberate and sharp. Heads turned one by one as she walked into the light, her handmade dress glowing softly under the spotlight. Clara's smile faltered, confusion clouding her perfect mask. Henry watched from across the room, curiosity turning to unease. The murmurs began to rise like a wave. Elisa's voice trembled at first, but it carried strength. "These designs you praise, I made them." The room went still, frozen in disbelief. Clara laughed, forced and nervous. "I'm sorry, who are you?" she said, her tone dripping with disdain. But Elisa didn't back down. Her chin lifted. "I am the one who stayed up every night making what you wear." Lucien, standing near the projector, turned on the screen behind her. Photos flashed images of Elisa sewing, sketching, fitting fabric on mannequins. Proof. The crowd gasped. Reporters raised their cameras. Henry's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The sound echoed louder than applause ever could. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was absolute, electric. Elisa stood in the center of it, her dress glowing like armor, her truth undeniable. Clara's face went pale, Henry's arrogance crumbled, and the ballroom, once a temple of vanity, became a witness to justice. The storm had broken, and Elisa was its lightning. Gasps rippled through the ballroom like waves hitting marble. Clara's voice faltered mid-laugh as the images behind Elisa continued flashing her sketches, her notes, her face illuminated by lamplight in the atelier. Every photograph was a confession, undeniable and raw. "This is absurd," Clara snapped, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound composed. But the audience wasn't convinced anymore. Henri stood frozen, the mask of confidence cracking for the first time. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and the once flawless atmosphere dissolved into chaos. Elisa's hands were steady now, her fear replaced by something purer truth. "You called my dress poor," she said calmly, eyes locked on Henri. "But it seems even your riches couldn't buy the talent you mock." The words struck like thunder. Lucien watched from the corner, pride glimmering in his eyes. He'd seen courage before, but nothing like this. Elisa wasn't simply defending herself, she was dismantling an empire built on deceit. The crowd began to murmur in agreement, some clapping hesitantly, others glaring at Clara. The air shifted, power was changing hands before their eyes. Clara tried to step forward, forcing a smile. "This woman is lying. She's a seamstress who—" But before she could finish, Lucien displayed a final photo, Clara asleep at her desk, while Elisa worked beside her. The proof silenced even the most skeptical. The truth didn't need more words. It stood tall in every thread, every stitch, every look of awe directed at Elisa. And for the first time that evening, Henri lowered his gaze. The arrogance in his expression melted into something else: regret, maybe respect. He didn't understand yet why he felt it, but deep inside, something in him shifted. The laughter that once humiliated now echoed as his own shame. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than applause, sharper than insult. Clara stumbled back, her voice breaking into desperate denial. "You're all being deceived," she cried, but the panic in her tone betrayed her. People began to film, whisper, and take sides. The gala, once a celebration of glamour, had turned into a public reckoning. And Elisa stood at its heart calm, radiant, unshakable. Henri finally found his voice. "Enough!" he barked, trying to restore control. But his authority no longer held the same weight. "No," Elisa said firmly, her voice cutting through his like silk through glass. "It's only enough when the truth is heard." She turned to the audience, her tone steady. "I created these designs, every one of them, and tonight I refuse to stay invisible." Clara's facade crumbled. "She's lying," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger. "She's nothing." But the projection behind her betrayed the truth: Elisa's initials embroidered inside every piece of fabric. Gasps filled the room again. Henri looked up, realization dawning in his eyes as guilt replaced disbelief. You did all this?" he asked softly, almost to himself. Elisa met his gaze, no anger in her eyes, only conviction. "Yes," she said, "and you mocked me for wearing what I made with my own hands." Henri opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. For once, the man of power had nothing to say. Around them, applause began, hesitant at first, then growing louder, unstoppable. As the crowd rose to their feet, Clara fled the stage, her empire collapsing under the weight of truth. Henri watched her go, then looked back at Elisa. In that moment, he saw something he'd never seen before. Not beauty, not fashion, but dignity. And it humbled him more than wealth ever could. The applause faded slowly, replaced by a stunned, reverent quiet. No one seemed to know what to do next. Elisa stood under the golden lights, her heart thundering, her mind blank. She hadn't planned any of this, she had simply told the truth. Yet that truth now echoed through every corner of the ballroom, reshaping reputations and rewriting power. The woman they had mocked now owned the room. Henri's gaze followed her like a confession. He had built a life believing that wealth equaled worth, that status defined superiority. But in that moment, seeing Elisa standing tall in her handmade dress, he felt something collapse inside him. He wanted to apologize, but pride held him back, the same pride that had made him cruel. For once, he couldn't buy a way out of guilt. Reporters swarmed the stage, flashes blinding Elisa as microphones reached toward her. "Who are you really? Why didn't you speak sooner? Will you press charges?" The questions blended into noise. She smiled faintly, exhaustion tugging at her, and said softly, "I am someone who just wanted to be seen." The room went still again. Even the press respected her quiet dignity. Lucien reached her side, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "You did it," he whispered, his voice full of pride. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "No," she said, "the truth did." Together they walked off the stage, leaving behind a sea of stunned faces. For Elisa, the night wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about freedom. As she stepped outside into the Paris night, the cold air hit her skin like clarity. She looked at the stars reflected on the Seine and smiled. For the first time she felt light, unburdened, unafraid. What began as humiliation had become transformation. And though she didn't know what would come next, she knew this: she would never bow her head again. The next morning, the headlines screamed her name. "Unknown seamstress exposes fashion empire scandal." Some praised her bravery, others called her reckless, but everyone was talking about her. Elisa's phone buzzed with messages, some kind, some cruel. And amid the chaos, one email stood out: her termination letter. The company she had built her dreams upon had discarded her overnight. She sat by the window of her small apartment, the city buzzing outside, the letter trembling in her hands. The humiliation burned, but not as deeply as before. She had faced worse and survived. Still, fear crept in like a cold draft. What now? Her name was known, but in an industry built on pride and politics, that fame could just as easily destroy her. Lucien arrived later that day, bringing croissants and a smile that tried to hide his worry. "You're not finished," he said firmly, setting his camera on the table. "You started something bigger than all of them. Let's use it." Elisa looked up, weary but curious. "Use it how?" He leaned closer, eyes bright. "Start your own line. Your name, your designs. Let the world see who you are on your terms." The idea terrified her. Money, resources, connections, she had none. But Lucien's belief in her felt unshakable, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "You already did," he replied. And in that moment she realized he was right. Courage wasn't a single act, it was a choice she could make again. As the day faded into evening, Elisa pinned new sketches on her wall, one after another. Each line carried defiance, each color whispered rebirth. She didn't know how she'd fund it or where it would lead, but she had one truth stitched into her heart. Her voice was her craft, and no one would silence it again. Weeks passed, and Paris seemed colder without the rhythm of her workdays. Elisa spent her mornings sketching at her tiny kitchen table, the scent of coffee mingling with the faint hum of traffic. The world had moved on, but she hadn't. Each design she drew felt like a memory stitched from heartbreak and defiance. The silence in her apartment echoed louder than the laughter that once haunted her. Then came the knock on the door. Lucien stood there, windblown and smiling, carrying a portfolio instead of flowers. "You've been hiding," he said gently, stepping inside. He laid the folder on her table. Inside were photographs of her designs, the same ones that had captivated the world during the scandal. "People still remember you," he said. "They just need to see what you'll do next." Elisa flipped through the photos, her hands trembling. The images radiated something powerful, not pity, but respect. Each stitch told a story, and each story belonged to her. Lucien leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "You don't need a company to define your worth," he said. "You are the brand." His words struck something deep inside her, something that refused to stay small. They spent the evening brainstorming designs, names, dreams. The air buzzed with possibility. Lucien offered to help her build an online portfolio and photograph each new creation. "If they won't open doors for you," he said, "we'll build our own." For the first time since the gala, Elisa laughed not bitterly but freely. The sound filled the room like sunlight. By midnight, sketches covered the walls, glowing under lamplight. A name formed in her mind: éclat d'âme, brightness of soul. It wasn't just fashion, it was rebirth. As Lucien left, he turned at the door and said, "You don't realize it yet, Elisa, but you're already becoming who you were meant to be." It had been 3 months since the scandal when the unexpected happened. Elisa's phone buzzed one morning, displaying a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, deep, composed, and remorseful. "Elisa Moreau," said Henri Beaumont. "I believe we need to talk." For a moment she couldn't breathe. The man who had mocked her now sought her out. Henri spoke slowly, his tone stripped of arrogance. "I owe you an apology," he began, "and perhaps an opportunity." He explained that after the fallout, Clara's reputation had collapsed and the company was floundering. "Your name carries more weight than any of us expected," he admitted. "I want to invest in you." Elisa listened in silence, conflicted. Could she trust a man who once humiliated her? Her instinct screamed no, but her heart urged caution. Henri continued, "You showed me something that night, dignity I didn't deserve to witness. You made me realize how blind I've been." For the first time, his voice wavered. Elisa stared at her reflection in the window, seeing both the woman she had been and the one she was becoming. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her tone calm, unshaken. After hanging up, she sat in silence, replaying his words. Once his approval would have meant everything. Now it meant nothing unless it aligned with her truth. She wasn't a girl seeking validation anymore. She was a woman weighing her own power. And power, she realized, was not in money but in choice. That evening, she called Lucien and told him everything. He listened, thoughtful, before replying. Maybe he finally learned what value really means. Elisa smiled softly. "Maybe," she said. "But this time if I walk into his world again, it'll be on my terms." A month later, Henri's offer became more than words, it became a meeting. The venue wasn't a marble ballroom this time, but a small café in Montmartre, humble and warm. Elisa arrived early, sketchbook in hand, unsure what to expect. When Henri entered, there was no entourage, no tailored arrogance, only a man stripped of pretense. He greeted her with sincerity instead of status. "Elisa," he began, "I wronged you deeply. I can't erase that, but I'd like to make amends by helping you build your own brand." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were contracts, investments, and letters of recommendation. "I want to be a silent partner," he said. "No control, just support." For once, his words carried no manipulation, only genuine remorse. Elisa studied him carefully. His eyes no longer gleamed with superiority. They held something more human, humility. "You want redemption," she said simply. Henri nodded. "And you want freedom," he replied. Their deal wasn't born from power but from acknowledgement. For the first time they met as equals, the arrogant man who had fallen and the woman who had risen. With Henri's resources and Lucien's artistic touch, Éclat d'âme took form. The first collection was intimate, only 7 pieces, each representing a stage of rebirth. Paris watched curiously as the seamstress who defied the elite returned to the scene. But this time the spotlight wasn't borrowed, it was hers entirely. Every stitch glowed with resilience, every dress carried her story. When the debut show opened, the audience sat in silence, not out of doubt, but reverence. No diamonds, no pomp, no excess, just truth woven into silk. As the final model walked, wearing a gown embroidered with the words, "Strength is silent," tears filled Elisa's eyes. She had lost everything once and rebuilt it from the ashes. Months later, the Paris Fashion Hall opened its doors once again, and this time, Elisa entered not as a guest but as the star. Photographers called her name, flashes lighting the night like constellations. The woman once ridiculed for a poor woman's dress now graced every headline as the soul of modern couture. Even Henri, standing beside her, seemed smaller next to her quiet radiance. Inside, the crowd buzzed with admiration and awe. Influencers, critics, and designers whispered her name with respect. But Elisa wasn't chasing approval anymore. She was chasing truth. Her designs told stories of perseverance, of dignity reclaimed. Each model that walked the runway carried a message. Elegance was never about wealth. It was about authenticity. After the final walk, the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Henri approached, hesitant, as if unsure he deserved to stand beside her. "You did it," he said softly. Elisa smiled, her expression kind but firm. "No," she replied. "We did it because I finally learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means moving forward without fear." Henri bowed his head in quiet respect. Later that evening, beneath the same chandelier where she had once been humiliated, Elisa stood alone. The room felt different now, not a cage of judgment, but a monument to triumph. She touched the fabric of her own gown, feeling the heartbeat of every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't enough. Tonight, she had rewritten that story for all of them. As she left the hall, Lucien caught up to her, smiling. "New York just called," he said. "They want Éclat d'Âme to headline next season." Elisa looked at him, laughter and disbelief mixing in her eyes. "New York," she whispered. "Then that's where the next chapter begins." The night breeze carried her words like a promise, soft, fierce, unstoppable. New York City pulsed like a living heartbeat beneath Elisa's hotel window. The skyline glimmered against the night, each light a reminder of how far she had come. From a small Paris apartment to the most prestigious runway in the world, it felt surreal, yet she wasn't nervous. The fear that once ruled her had transformed into quiet confidence, stitched together through pain, courage, and grace. Tomorrow, Éclat d'Âme would debut on the world stage. Backstage at the Manhattan Fashion Pavilion, chaos reigned, models rushing, assistants shouting, cameras flashing. But in the center of it all, Elisa stood calm, her hands moving with precision as she adjusted a sleeve here, a ribbon there. "Perfection isn't in symmetry," she whispered to a nervous model. "It's in sincerity." The words flowed easily, the voice of a woman who had learned to lead through kindness, not pride. Henri arrived moments before the show began, more humble than ever, holding a single white rose. "For luck," he said, offering it awkwardly. Elisa smiled, taking it gently. "For peace," she corrected. The two exchanged a look that spoke of forgiveness, not romantic, but human. He had taught her about arrogance, and she had taught him about redemption. Both had grown, but she had soared. When the lights dimmed and the music began, the audience fell silent. One by one, models floated down the runway in Elisa's design, silk, lace, and courage intertwined. Every piece told a story of resilience, every seam a testimony to self-worth. By the final dress, embroidered with a single phrase born of dignity, the crowd rose to their feet, tears shining under the lights. The applause was thunderous, but Elisa only smiled, her heart full and still. After the show, she stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. The wind caught her hair, the sounds of the crowd fading into the hum of Manhattan life. Lucien joined her, camera in hand. "You've done it," he said softly. Elisa looked out at the glittering horizon. "No," she whispered, her voice steady and warm. "I've just begun." And as the city lights reflected in her eyes, Elisa Moreau, once mocked, now magnificent, smiled into the dawn of her new beginning. In a world obsessed with appearances, Elisa Moreau proved that true elegance is born from dignity. She didn't need diamonds. She didn't need power, only courage to be seen for who she really was. Tell me, what would you have done if you were in her place? Leave your thoughts below, and if this story inspired you, give it a like, share it, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart.